which is a report on the annual report on the control of the financial activities of the EIB for 2017. It is, of course, very important for us to have President Hoyer here for this discussion too. First of all, the rapporteur, who has 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. President Hoyer, Commissioner, as Madam President pointed out, it is most welcome that we have you personally here for this annual discussion of the topic of the control on financial activities of the European Investment Bank. I have had the privilege of closely following the activities of the bank from this perspective, both as rapporteur for the Budget Control Committee and as shadow rapporteur, virtually for the past running on 5 years. And I am glad to present today a report which builds on Parliament's positions from previous years and which has received very strong support in the committee. I would like to highlight that the report points out that the bank's lending activities for 2017 amounting to €69.9 billion, and the conclusion of the Audit Committee that the financial statements adopted by the EIB Board of Directors present a true and fair view of the financial position of the bank as of 31st December 2017, and of the results of its operation and cash flows for 2017 in accordance with the applicable accounting framework. At the same time, President and Commissioner, the report refers to a continuing concern having to do with the geographical distribution of the signatures of the bank, a theme which we have been returning to over the past years. For this year, the data shows, and the report underlines, the highly worrying fact that in 2017, half of the member states received 80% of the total EIB investment inside the EU, while the other 14 member states received only 10% of this investment. And I highlight this point in the light of what Commissioner Katainen and, to a certain extent, President Hoyer pointed out in the previous discussion, namely that the EIB is a passive recipient of project demands and, on the basis of its commercial assessment, finances some or does not. This does not correspond to the statutory obligation of the bank to play an active role for the balanced development of the internal market and for the social, economic and territorial cohesion. Certainly nobody puts under question the necessity for sound investments, but clearly the role of the bank cannot be reduced to a passive recipient of requests for financing. There is a key requirement of the bank to perform, and this is pointed out in the recitals of the report, to perform a regular and thorough needs assessment in various sectors, and this is key for determining investment gaps and barriers in different investment regions and identifying a pool of opportunities for potential for growth in job investments. Regarding the governance of the bank, which is strictly within the Budget Control Committee's remit, I would like to point out that there has been a progressive response by the bank in line with Parliament resolutions in making better access to minutes of the meetings of the various bodies of the bank, in improving the complaints procedures which are applied by the bank. And in this regard, I would like to welcome the efforts made. And in conclusion, however, I would like to point out that there are still significant problems having to do with the prevention of conflict of interests of the members of the FC Investment Committee and provisions of more stringent rule on conflict of interest prevention in Management Board and Board of Directors, and regarding transparency and disclosure of information on intermediaries and final recipients in relation to prevention of tax avoidance, fraud and corruption. I realize, Madam President, I have overrun by 30 to 40 seconds. I will economize on my final remarks. Thank you.
Kiitos esittelijälle. Kiitokset edustaja Piri.
Thank you very much indeed, Rapporteur. It's now my pleasure to ask President Hoyer to address us again.
Thank you very much, Madam President. It's a great pleasure to address the plenary for a second time this evening and to discuss what the EIB Group, that is the European Investment Bank and the European Investment Fund, have done and will continue to do to help support Europe's economy. In particular, of course, I would like to highlight how we are controlling our financial activities and address some of the points in the excellent report of the Budgetary Control Committee, for which I thank the rapporteur and the other members of the European Parliament who have contributed to this. Ladies and gentlemen, on July 18 of last year, we celebrated the completion of our pledge to deliver over €315 billion of additional investment through EFSI, the Juncker plan. And in fact, by mid-July, we had surpassed this goal, providing support to investments mobilizing €335 billion. And we're well on track on delivering the target of €500 billion by 2020. While this particular success story continues, the tasks and challenges for the bank are not diminishing, and some of them have been raised in the debate before. We have just discussed some of them, and some among those, for instance, the ramifications stemming from Brexit, they are only the most obvious ones. As the report of the Budgetary Control Committee indicates, there are also internal challenges for the bank, and I'd like to highlight two of these: reforming the governance and measuring additionality and fostering cohesion. Honourable members, the EIB remains at the forefront of international financial institutions when it comes to transparency standards and the quality of its governance. We follow international best practice and are aligned with other IFIs. This holds true, for example, for the bank's transparency policy, which we revised in 2015 and we will do again next year. And it equally applies to our policies to combat fraud and corruption, as well as enhance accountability. In view of our dual role of delivering EU policy while also serving as a bank with the highest standards, we have intensified our cooperation with Olaf, the European Ombudsman, as well as ongoing exchange with NGOs. We take their demands and recommendations very seriously, and we just had a celebration of 10 years of complaints mechanisms at the bank, together with the European Ombudsman and the Secretary General of the European Ombudsman, and that was a very encouraging event. In 2018, in February, the bank has put into practice its new exclusion policy, fully aligned with the European Commission. Last November, our governing bodies adopted a revised complaints mechanism policy. Actors such as the European Ombudsman and Transparency International, as well as the input from public consultations, were a crucial part of this process. We are readying ourselves for future challenges and thereby strengthening the governance. We are rolling out reforms to strengthen the internal financing. In July, the EIB Board of Directors agreed on a roadmap of several governance changes. A total of 14 different actions have been set in motion and will be implemented during the first half of this year. Without going too much into detail, let me highlight one particular aspect that is also in the focus of this year's committee report. We will enhance our internal control and risk management environment and strengthen the 3 lines of defence model across the bank, both at the level of the EIB Management Committee as well as among the bank's services. We will also make sure that one MC member oversees risk management and therefore will not be responsible directly for any first-line activities. Moreover, I would like to stress that the bank is close to finalising the revision of its code of conduct. This is an important point raised not only by previous EP resolutions, but also by our own EIB Audit Committee. Another example of how to strengthen our governance is the discussion we are having about introducing a Group Chief Risk Officer. It would be part of a revision of the EIB Group Management Charter. Additional actions aim to strengthen the decision-making capacity of the Board as well as the EIB supervisory framework. And finally, we are constantly revising and assessing the actual value added we create. Let me therefore briefly touch upon my second point, additionality and cohesion. The concept of additionality is central to FC, however, is already central to EIB itself. Because if we are not needed, if the private sector can do the job, then we are redundant. So additionality is nothing new for us. But on FC, we are particularly keen on showing that what we do is additional indeed. As you are well aware, eligible projects must point to market failures or suboptimal investment situations. Eligibility is only the precondition, whereas additionally ensures that within such eligible operations our EIB support provides a tangible contribution, that it makes a difference. EIB support must complement support from other sources. The test of additionality is whether the intervention by the bank facilitates or strengthens an eligible project from a public welfare perspective, in a way that the market alone would not deliver, at least not to the same extent or in the same time frame. The EU Bank is at the forefront among IFIs in measuring additionality, and we are always looking to improve indeed. EIB services have begun to recalibrate our current three-pillar assessment. Ladies and gentlemen, as the EU Bank, we look at structural investment needs and continue to support the EU's transition to sustainable finance and sustainable climate. Therefore, our ambition to enhance growth, support employment, and act as a catalyst for increased public and private sector investment remain key. We recognize that supporting innovation on the one hand and deepening integration and cohesion on the other are not a contradiction, but they must be undertaken at the same time. For only an integrated and inclusive financial and economic area can offer the required market dimensions to support innovation across Europe. And only an innovative and competitive Europe can provide the economic and political foundations for deeper integration and cohesion. Supporting cohesion and increasing convergence remains paramount to the Bank. We will continue our activities to support cohesion via a mix of products, including structured programme loans, sector-specific programme loans, and transport infrastructure loans. This made up 26% of our activities in 2015 and 16. In 2017, we channeled 29.6% of all our lending to cohesion priority regions, just short of our ambitious target of 30%. In 2018, I'm happy to announce that we exceeded this target with 31.8% of our lending for the year in cohesion priority regions. I'm also happy to announce that the climate action signatures have reached 30.3%, far ahead of the 26% objective. Some worry that we care too little about regional coverage. Admittedly and deliberately, we do not apply regional or national quotas, but we look at our activities also through a regional lens. For example, the example of EFSI shows that geographical diversification is improving. The share of the top 3 member states, Italy, Germany and France, of the infrastructure window decreased from 55% in October 2016 to below 40% in 2018. Indeed, measured as a share of GDP, which presents a much more accurate picture, the figure is very different. For instance, it's Greece, Estonia, Portugal, Bulgaria and Lithuania, which are the top 5 recipients of EFSI financing by GDP in 2018. And that, I think, is a remarkably good result. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by assuring you that the EU Bank has delivered and will continue to deliver on its objectives. Through its financial firepower, including the Juncker Plan, we provide a very significant contribution to jobs and growth in the EU and external action outside the European Union. We are the Bank of the EU. And that means we are more than the sum of our national interests and an excellent example of Europe in action. And we are, in a certain way, the good news institution of the European Union. As the EU Bank, I can assure you that we will stay unwavering in our support to mobilize investment across the entire Union, and we will tackle the structural investment and cohesion challenges facing Europe and Europe's single market, in particular when it comes to the role of Europe in the world, which is changing dramatically. Thank you very much for your attention.
Kiitos pääjohtaja Hoyer. Ja sitten
Thank you very much, President Hoyer. The next speaker is Commissioner Katainen.
First I want to thank especially Georgi Pirinski, rapporteur, and other members who have participated to this work. It's an excellent report. So everybody knows that the EIB is an indispensable partner in financing infrastructure, but also SMEs, innovations in various regions of Europe, climate action, sustainable transport, artificial related investments, etc. The Commission strongly supports the ambitious climate action strategy of the bank, matching the commitments of the Paris Agreement. Increased investment, especially renewable energy, energy efficiency and circular economy, focusing on high impact activities and products, is key in achieving this objective. Also, advisory services to the companies operating in relatively new areas like circular economy or artificial intelligence is very much needed. And there is a need to look at how financial needs match well to the palette or the services which are available. So the bank has a continuous challenge to look at if the products fits for purpose, because the economy around us is changing. In the context of Brexit, we welcome the bank's utmost efforts to ensure that its ability to achieve its financing objectives is not affected. As for the bank's external lending activities, as we talked under the previous point, Commission and EIB is working very closely together to find a workable solution to ensure operational predictability for the EIB post-2020. It goes without saying that the EIB will continue to play a significant role in promoting EU's interests abroad and delivering on the Agenda 2030. Thank you very much.
kiitokset varapuheenjohtaja Katainen.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Katainen. The next speaker is the Earl of Dartmouth.
Chair, to rephrase Mark Antony's famous speech from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, I've come to praise the management of the European Investment Bank, not to bury them. The EIB's commitment to proper commercial banking practice and its execution has been impressive. In consequence, the EIB now has a stronger balance sheet than, for example, Deutsche Bank. Now, to declare an interest, the UK government, the British government, has a 16% shareholding. Now, that holding has a book value of €39 billion. We want that value still to be there. It is therefore most important that the adherence to sound commercial principles is not diluted or limited by political imperatives. Demands for the politicisation of lending should be resisted, even if, indeed especially, if those demands come from the Green parties and their hangers-on.
Kiitokset Earl of Dartmouth.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, on behalf of the EPP, Mr. Deutsch. 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. President, Commissioner, dear colleagues. It is not by way of being very polite, but I do want to congratulate Mr. Pirinski for an exceptionally good quality report. It excellently summarizes what the European Parliament has concluded in the past couple of years with regard to the EBB. and it also respects and reflects the criticisms that are included in the reports of the European Court of Auditors. There are certain problems and there are certain things that are lacking, as the report says, but the European Investment Bank works properly, works as it should work. I would like to point out two issues. The EIB is a bank, basically, and there are lending problems within the European Union. There are problems, but the European Union, the 15 countries which were members before 2004 are the beneficiaries of the lending policy, almost the sole beneficiaries of the lending policy. And we also find it very important to extend lending to the remaining member states and to the Western Balkan countries.
Sitten SND-ryhmän nimissä puhuu edustaja Ayala.
Thank you. Ms. Ayala Sanders next.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam President. I'd like to welcome Mr. Katainen and I'd like to welcome Mr. Hoyer. Thank you very much for attending this debate. And I'd like to thank and congratulate Mr. Pirinski because he has put all his wisdom and experience over the years in this report. And he knows the ins and outs of the activities of the EIB, and it's reflected in the report. And of course, we have said that the European Court of Auditors needs to be able to audit the activities of the bank. I have three recurring points. The issue of territorial impact. If I understood you correctly, you said that in 2018, or compared to 2017, 2018 has represented some progress. I'd like to know whether you talked about them being fifth. Is it all these countries that you mentioned together? Because I remember you mentioned Spain and Italy. Is it all together? Then it's not so much progress. If it's individual, then it is substantive progress. Now, migration. As you said, there are problems in Africa and also in the Middle East. But in the case of Africa, when it comes to microcredit to micro enterprises, we feel that the EIB has signed a lot of contracts, and we're very pleased about that. But when we look at implementation, then we'll see that most of them are at a zero rate. And we're worried about that because we have to make sure that the EIB is also a bank that fosters development with our main counterparts. Now, startups are clamoring for funding and they end up going to the US. Why is this the case? And Madam President, if you don't mind, I was very surprised to see that we're not measuring or counting how many jobs were created thanks to the activities. Is there no way of looking at how many jobs are created by our projects? I think the EIB should start counting. Thank you.
Kiitos ja pyytäisin todella, että pidätte kiinni
Thank you very much. Please keep to your speaking time. The next speaker for the ECR group, Mr. Czarnecki. 1 minute.
Pani Przewodnicząca, Panie Prezesie Hoyer, Panie
President, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I think we're talking in terms of your bank being a policy taker rather than a policy maker. All these issues relating to climate policy, for example, are really determined by the member states, and they're the shareholders. And over and above that, the European Investment Bank does have its own policies and its own guidelines, but it is given a mandate by the legislature. The Juncker Plan and EFSI are your basis for allocating projects, and we've heard 25%, 40%. Those are quite impressive figures. I do have one reservation, though. I'd like to talk about additionality and added value and how you quantify that for the citizens in the relevant area. Sometimes this can be somewhat controversial. Sometimes climate goals actually make investment more difficult. Thank you.
Kiitokset edustaja Czarnecki. Sitten
Thank you very much, Mr. Czarnecki. The next speaker for the ALDE group is Mr. Ali. 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Katainen, Mr. Hoyer, dear colleagues, Mr. Rapporteur, first of all, I would like to congratulate the Rapporteur for the report. The pivotal role of the bank is to ensure value-adding strategic public investment supporting the sustainable growth and creating high-value jobs within the EU. As an example, the overall finance approved by the EIB group within the EU in 2015-2016 will support €544 billion of investment at 2.3% to GDP and create 2.25 million jobs by the year 2020. In 2017, the EIB successfully achieved its objectives, implementing EU policy in line with its mission and is as detailed in its operational plan. The bank lending signature reached almost €70 billion, of which 90% within the Union. This financial resource was dedicated to 4 strategic areas: innovation and skills, infrastructure, environmental projects, as well as the SMEs and mid-caps. The SMEs received more than 40% of the whole sum, which is in correspondence with the role as backbone of the European economy. Results would be better with proactive policy and increasing the funding to these enterprises. We are satisfied with the conclusion of the Audit Committee that the financial statement adopted by the EIB Board of Directors presents a true and fair view of the financial position of the bank and of the results of its operational and cash flows. A better corporate governance will be achieved, paying greater attention to mid and long-term effects when defining investment actions and its funding decisions. In order to speed up the economic recovery in the Union and to help certain economic sectors and geographical areas to catch up, a major role plays in European funding for strategic investments. With mobilised investment at the end of 2017 exceeding €207 billion, EFSI is on the way to reach its goal. Despite the need to avoid some of the geographical imbalances, the improvement in transparency is visible with the publication of the EFSI Investment Committee decisions and the documents adopted by the steering board together within the minutes of the meetings. Thank you.
kiitos edustaja Ali. Sitten
Thank you, Mr. Ali. The next speaker is Mr. Tarand. 1.5 minutes.
Kiitoksia puheenjohtaja. I'm not going to assess the comparison made by the Jarl of Dartmouth, who is more commercial, European Investment Bank or Deutsche Bank. I just would like to say that I'm happy that we don't compare European Investment Bank with Danske Bank, which is involved in many dubious things. Still, we would love to see, despite your denial, Mr. Hoyer, what Olaf has said about your links to Volkswagen Gate, or whatever we may call the scandal, and transparency would not hurt you, and not us as well. Finally, I would like to say that de-investment is a great promising policy, and even though Mr. Czarnecki maybe wishes your investment into Polish coal industry, we should support him as well by not investing into not renewable energy sectors. Thank you.
kiitos edustaja Tarand. Sitten
Thank you, Mr. Tarand. Now for the GUE group, Mr. Flanagan, 2 minutes.
Few reservations. It's a report I can support, so good work, Mr. Pirinski. The EIB could be well described as one of the EU's success stories, and in recent years especially, it's good to see it investing in a growing number of small and medium enterprises, an area which has been badly let down by the conventional banking system, not just in my own country, but right across the EU. I know from speaking to constituents how difficult it is for SMEs to get access to finance in Ireland, even for the most viable of small companies. Our banks, every one of which was bailed out by the people, have abdicated that most basic responsibility for that sector, injecting finance into the real economy. Of course, we wouldn't need that injection were it not for the actions of another, by far more devious EU institution, the ECB. Page 96 of its 2017 report, which we debated yesterday, contains the following paragraph. The reduction of IBRC-related assets by the Central Bank of Ireland during 2017, mainly through sales of long-duration floating rate notes, is a significant step in the direction of the necessary full disposal of these assets. A more ambitious sales schedule would further mitigate the persisting serious monetary financing concerns. I'll translate that for you. The weaponisation of the euro by the ECB in Ireland continues, with more success recorded in 2017 when the Central Bank of Ireland destroyed another €4 billion. This ongoing destruction of borrowed billions is the result of a bailout of two insolvent non-systemic banks, that the latter became IBRC, a bailout that we, the ECB, forced on the Irish government through blackmail and threats. Ireland has already destroyed €19 billion, with plans to destroy a further €12 billion in coming years. All this has been achieved without a shot being fired and without a word of protest from the Irish government. Once again, I compliment Mr Pirinski on his report and compliment the EIB on its work. Would that the ECB would take note.
Kiitos edustaja Flanagan.
Thank you very much, Mr Flanagan. Now, for the ENF group, Mr Annemans, 1 minute.
EIB.
Ladies and gentlemen, the EIB shouldn't be a tool for fads. We hear recommendations to extend their investment in green investments, even though at 25% they're well above the target they already set. The Commission is actually not even able to reach their modest target of 20%. The EIB is going to invest more in lagging areas where there's poor infrastructure, brain drains and lack of reliable institutions. But this is not the role of the EIB. It's really to work within the market context to use the pillars, SMEs, infrastructure, transport and that sort of thing. The EIB has to remain a bank with bankable projects rather than a politically steered vehicle, and for that reason I'm going to abstain. Thank you, Mr Annemans. The next speaker on the list is Mrs Gressler.
Thank you very much, President Hoyer, Vice President of the Commission, colleagues. It's not such a simple, straightforward issue. We're very glad to have you here. I want to try to speak to the point, difficult as it may be. We know what you have achieved, a great deal of improvement in the governance of the bank, and we're very grateful to you for that. But we have identified one or two shortcomings. I'd like to say that it's important that there's real accountability, because transparency is of the essence, and that also means accountability and transparency vis-à-vis us. And therefore, I'd like to think that we'll be able to find more slots for you to come to the committee to enhance transparency in that respect. In terms of the management bodies and at operational level too, we think that it would be possible to improve accountability. So more than just publications, but a bit more detail and a bit more genuine accountability as to what has been going on. So we'd like to hear a bit more about your administrative costs, about your projects and plans, your cost estimates, and we're very happy if you tell us a bit more about how you monitor projects which have been ongoing for 7 years and more. I would be delighted if we could get this information. It would also be good if we could know how much private investment was going into the EIB projects, because we know that public sector institutions leverage private sector money, but we sometimes don't get all the breakdowns. I'd also like to think that the bank will do more in terms of promoting and hiring women. Thank you very much for being here.
Kiitokset, rouva Gressle.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Gressler. The next speaker is Mr. Liberatsky. 1.5 minutes.
Dziękuję bardzo, Pani Przewodnicząca.
Thank you very much, Madam President, Commissioner, President of the Bank. I'm not going to ask about women's quotas. Let's stick to bank issues. We've had a very good rapporteur in Mr. Pirinski, and I think what we're seeing is basically there's a healthy institution here which is performance oriented. It is striving to implement their objectives at the same time. This function works as a decent form of investment, so we're very pleased about that. You are an investment bank after all. I'd like to express my satisfaction with the fact that the EIB has been financing development and growth. I have a certain level of expectations linked to the FC funds being linked to the EIB. Maybe there's a form of blended financing that could be used with FC and private funding, and that would allow the investment volumes to grow. In 2017, in regional terms, or rather than in geographical terms, the balance has been improved to a degree, but I still have an appeal to you, not necessarily in terms of discussions, but maybe in terms of extending the knowledge of the modern instruments in the finance world amongst those countries who are less acquainted with those. And thank you for the extra 7 seconds I was given.
Kiitos, edustaja Liberadzki. Sitten...
Thank you, Mr. Liberatsky. The next speaker is Mr. Marias for 1 minute.
Mr. Hoyer, silence is golden is the proverb. You didn't say anything about Fraport, and I asked you before about it. Foreign investors need to have warm money, their own money, and not just use EU funds to make supposed investments and snatch assets. Now, Athens International Airport, international investors got 250 million euro from ETEP, in other words from you, in order to extend the contract for 20 years. TAC, 1.5 billion euro given to multinationals such as BP, and because Mr. Katainen didn't manage to protect you, because the money that you give to SMEs are peanuts. We have FC that covers Greece, and why do you think we get such good rates? 280 million to Fraport, 150 million to Cosmote, Greek telecom company, in other words Deutsche Bank, more than 300 to a French multinational that opened Vesfa, which is the natural gas company, 700 million euro from FC for TAC. That is why Greece is doing so well, because the money came to us but ended up in the hands of the multinational companies. That's a situation, and let's call a spade a spade.
Kiitokset, edustaja Marias.
Thank you very much, Mr. Marias. The next speaker is Mr. Van Nistelrooy. Go ahead.
President Neuer, Commissioner, a few comments from a regional policy perspective as the EPP coordinator in the Regional Affairs Committee. Your role is very important, and Mr. Hoyer has already given us a very interesting analysis of the way in which you work to try to restore equilibrium in Europe, and have done so in the last 10 years since the economic recession. Now, this is something which you need to continue to do, and I'm delighted to see in this report that Mr. Pirinski's looked exhaustively at the territorial aspect, which is so important in Europe. Then the second point, your advisory role, or consultative role. You talked yesterday with us about Invest EU. This is a new hub which you're going to be involved in too. Now, we need to do a lot more targeted work there. We need to use the Jaspers program for the regions, and I think that at the moment the situation is such that there's money going into it, there are advisors being made available via yourselves, but it's not really got off the ground in the way that we'd hoped, and it seems to be lagging a bit. So I'm hoping that InvestEU will give a fillip to this program too. And then the third thing I want to say is that you have a less exclusive position in the InvestEU structure, and I think it will be good if you work together with other partners. I think that 1 + 1 can actually equal 3. There's no point in you waiting for others to take the initiatives. The Commissioner said yesterday that InvestEU will be more policy driven when we were talking about this yesterday, and you need to be reporting on that and also reporting on Jaspers, and I'd like you to tell us more about that today if you can. But your role is changing, and Ms. Gressler is right, you need to work on the governance too. Thank you.
Kiitokset edustaja Nistelrooij.
Thank you very much, Mr. Van Nistelrooy. The final speaker will be Mr. Kelly. Go ahead. 1.5 minutes.
We don't see you around these parts too often, Mr. Hoyer, nor should we, because it's not your place of work. But it's good to have you here today and to listen to you and to exchange discussions and views with you. Also, it's an opportunity for us, I think, to compliment the good work that the EIB have done in boosting investment and especially in helping to lead to growth and prosperity. Over 60 years, 1.1 trillion in 160 countries is pretty impressive. And above all, I think the role you've played in helping to get us out of the recession in the last number of years is very significant. And I think also you opened a bank, an office of the bank in Dublin 2 years ago with Mr. Cormac Murphy, the head, and I want to compliment him on the good work he is doing and indeed the cooperation he has given me, and also Commissioner Katainen when I've held several seminars around my constituency in regarding to EFSI, and that has been a huge success, as you pointed out. And I am pleased that as a rapporteur for a successor for the Industry Committee, we voted overwhelmingly today to continue on in that line in InvestEU. And I think especially, as other speakers have said, we want to see more emphasis being put on supporting SMEs. And I agree with the rapporteur when they said that we should have especially more advisory capacities for SMEs so they can see the opportunities. So overall, a good job is being done. I welcome also what you said about Brexit, but I do hope that the Member States will show the same generosity in filling the gap left by the United Kingdom regarding our general budget.
Kiitos edustaja Kelly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kelly. We move on now to the Catch the Eye procedure. Mr. Strojewski is the first. 1 minute.
Bardzo dziękuję.
Thank you very much. The 4 most important points. EFSI has had a good effect and we're very pleased about that, but the leverage effect is maybe not panning out in the way that was originally planned. Maybe we were too optimistic about it. The geographical disparities constitute weaknesses, and progress is being made far too slowly. What is important is that there's investment made in space technologies. That's somewhere where we need to do more. And what is especially important is planning. Of course, I'm not levelling criticism here, because what we've heard in the chamber was extremely interesting. The President went over his speaking time by 300%. Mr. Katainen only used 60% of his speaking time. I think we need more accuracy here.
No niin. Sitten vielä yksi puheenvuoro edustajilta.
Thank you very much. Another speaker, Mr. Polchak, 1 minute.
Thank you, Chair, for the floor. I'm aware of the situation of EIB. Its position is to invest in strategic area, sustainable growth and jobs. And this is very important for our SMEs and the regions which lag behind. I would also like to support the value of the balance and territorial cohesion. Talking about SMEs, we should also acknowledge that according to the annual report, 40% of EIB investments went towards SMEs. So I'm sure that the target was met. I would call for being very cautious about lending. Of course, lending needs to be efficient and effective, but within the financial markets being so volatile, we really need to be very cautious, and this has not been said here yet. Thank you.
Kiitos edustaja Polčák. Ja nyt sitten
Thank you, Mr. Polčák. I'd like to give the floor now to Commissioner Katainen.
I would like to praise the work what Member Kelly has done in his constituencies. I know he is not the only one who has done the same, but I wanted to raise his work as an example because it is exactly what we need. We need to tell to our citizens, to our companies, what is available, how they can benefit from the European Investment Bank, what EFSI can offer, because otherwise there's a risk that people don't know what is available. EU institutions and even our financial instruments are not as simple to understand as normal bank loan from the local bank, and that's why we have to spread the word. The reason why some member states have benefited more than the others, and some regions have benefited more than the others, for instance from EFSI, is mostly because there has been active either politicians or public authorities which have told citizens and companies what is available. My second point is just to thank members for substantial and civilized and rather consensual discussion on this issue. It's a good basis to continue cooperation. Thank you very much.
kiitos varapuheenjohtaja Katainen.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Katainen. The next speaker will be President Hoyer. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I'm now a little bit in a dilemma. I've just been criticized for overdrawing my time account, and I have roughly 20 questions that deserve a precise answer. So please forgive me if I don't address them all, but I promise again you will get the answers in an appropriate way and as soon as possible. A few general remarks. The question of regional distribution begins to touch my nerves, because I think everybody who has a feeling that his or her own country has maybe 1 per mil less than the neighbor is complaining about regional distribution. I told you the facts and figures about EFSI projects. On general, on all EIB projects, the GDP-based distribution of the lending shows Greece number 1, Cyprus number 2, Portugal number 3, Croatia number 4, Poland number 5. Is that so wrong? I think this is exactly the priority setting that you are expecting from us. So I think we are making real progress on that question. Second issue, I just wanted to throw into the debate the word infrastructure. I heard it several times. The European Union has a significant problem with the infrastructure, the quality of the infrastructure. We are not investing enough in the maintenance of our infrastructure, which leads to a structural degradation of the quality of our infrastructure. We need to address that issue. It is much more sexy to build new things, but to maintain old ones. But this is an issue we have to address. On the question, very interesting question, Madam Sander had put that on startups. We have a serious problem here in corporate financing in general in Europe, but in startup financing in particular. The fact is that roughly 75% of all corporate financing in Europe is via banks and not via the capital markets. In the US, it's exactly the other way around. And this is the reason why sometimes when an intelligent inventor develops something new, opens a market, develops a new product, then he or she might be very, very successful in the startup phase, but then comes growth financing. And for growth financing, we don't have enough instruments. I would love to see EIB activities developing further in this field, because I hate seeing sometimes the most promising products leaving Europe and being then developed with huge money in other continents. By the way, the employment effects of our activities we measure as far as we can precisely. So maybe we can give you a couple of figures afterwards, but I just saw that, for instance, our analysis shows that in 2018 the number of SMEs supported was 285,000 and the number of jobs maintained in SMEs and mid-caps was 3.9 million. We need to probably publish these figures more loudly and with more self-esteem. Financing. Well, long-time financing. Ladies and gentlemen, some of you want to see us as a commercial bank and some want to see us as a political instrument. We are both. We need to perform in several areas like a commercial bank because we are refinancing completely on the capital markets. We must have the trust and the confidence of the investors. Otherwise, they don't give us 60, 70, 80 billion per year in EIB bond purchases. On the other hand, we serve a public goal. Our objectives are set by you and the Council and the Commission. And that means that we have to reconcile the role of a public institution with commercial behavior and expertise on the markets. And I think we are quite successful in that. On the question of transparency, from Gressler, I share your view, and I think we are making progress, but we still can get better. But there is one issue, two small issues I would like to address. Number one, please bear in mind EIB is a very lean institution. Very lean institution. We have 3,500 people in the bank. Sounds a lot. But we are doing twice the volume of the World Bank with this. And 8 times the volume of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. The World Bank has 18,000 people, and the EBRD in London has 2,500 people. So we are a lean institution. Sometimes we are criticized for not being represented visually with official offices in all member states of the European Union. Yes, we try to be as efficient as possible. Please take this as a serious effort to be visible and available everywhere, but at a cost reduction or containment strategy that we pursue. And the last word, Madame Gressler, on gender. Well, you run into open doors with me, and whenever a member state comes with a new proposal for the management committee and the member state proposes a lady, I will embrace that immediately. Spain has just done it, and I'm very grateful for that, but we could definitely have more. But this is not in the hand of the management of the bank. This is exclusively in the hands of the member state. When it comes to our top managerial personnel, we have made progress in the 7 years that I'm at the bank now from 28, what was the exact figure? From 18% to 26% in the top positions. So we are moving up in the right way. It cannot come overnight because you need a couple of years of career in the bank in order to get there. But I promise you I'll have that in view in each and every personnel decision we take, as long as we don't do discriminatory activities against the other gender. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Director General. I would like to point out that I'm not sure that Mr. Zdrojewski wanted you to speak less. Maybe he wanted Vice President Katainen to speak more. So it's a great privilege for us to have you here. Yes. Now I would invite our rapporteur, Mr. Pirinski, to close the debate by taking the floor. Mr. Pirinski.
Thank you very much. First, of course, I would like to thank all those who commended the report. I would like to point out that this is a report by the whole committee, and I take certain credit in the name of the committee for what President Hoyer has highlighted, the steps in the direction of greater transparency, greater accountability. I believe that this is an example of the usefulness of these types of discussions on this type of a report, so I think we can be satisfied from that point of view. I also would like to return to the geographical aspect. What the President has told us are figures which also show increased awareness and movement towards a better distribution. At the same time, you will agree that a proportion of 80 to 10 is anything but a sustainable balance, and clearly here there is a challenge to be met. And I would also finally like to mention that the type of discussion we have had, the fact that the President has been as outgoing as possible and a bit excited at the end, if I may say, is a good sign of commitment for further progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pirinski. And here with The debate is closed and the vote will be conducted tomorrow. Now I would like to make a communication. Following consultations with the political groups, the President wishes to put to the House the following proposal for change to the agenda. On Thursday, the debate on the situation in Togo is postponed to a later part session.